Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the 8-Bit Adventures podcast, bringing you the latest and greatest microcosm of geeky news of the week. I am your host, Sean Hayes, and with me is my co-host, as always, Courtney Bolin.
Hey, everybody.
So, not we really had to dig deep for some news for this week, but we're also going to do an AMA for Tales of Jemmora. So I know I
Yeah.
did a couple episodes ago. I did kind of a solo cast and talked about stuff. Really wanted to do it with Courtney so that way I could have somebody to go back and forth and ask questions and everything. And since there wasn't a lot to talk about, we're gonna do that this time. Um,
hmm
Before we begin, no show next week as I will be on vacation.
And Courtney
So
doesn't know how to work the streaming stuff, or y'all would just keep watching me play
yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
One of these days. One of these days.
Um, so yeah. Why don't we get right into our quickfire news? And so
Yeah.
that we can get that out of the way, and then we'll dig right into our AMA.
Sounds good.
All right. So first and foremost, today, as of our live episode and our filming date, it's March 10th. It is Mario Day, so happy Mario Day. Um,
Yeah, woo.
Nintendo's not really actually doing anything special for this day specifically. They're doing stuff like throughout the month, and for the 35th, I think this marks the end of the 35th anniversary of Super Mario Brothers because it's the 35th anniversary of Zelda. Um,
hmm
so stuff like that. But there's all sorts of little fun activities and stuff that they have up going on. Just nothing specific for this day.
Actually, they do have a sale going on some of their Mario titles in the
Okay.
eShop. You can save 35% on select Mario games, like Luigi's Mansion, Super Mario Party, Mario Tennis Aces, and Super Mario Maker 2.
Okay.
So you can get 35% off of those until March 13th.
Okay. Yeah. So nothing specific for this day, but through the
No.
weekend. So
Yes.
35%. So games are what, 59.99?
Yep.
Do you remember
Those
typically?
ones
All right.
are.
So times 0.65. So you're gonna pay $40. So it's about $20 off.
hmm
So not too bad. It's certainly a lot better than usual prices, which is they
hmm
never go on sale.
Yeah, I
Uh,
actually looked to see if Mario Kart or anything like that was on in the sale.
Never,
It's not.
never.
No. I mean, it would be awesome if it was, but
Sure.
yeah.
Um, Next up, WandaVision season 1 has wrapped. So if you are somebody that likes to binge everything in one go, you can do that. Um, Courtney it does
I
not
have
wish to
stopped.
finish out the season, so we won't be doing a spoiler cast on it. Just so that I
Sorry,
don't
folks. I
spoil
think
what
this is the
happens for
first time
her.
I've actually. Yeah, I think this is the first time I've actually. And this is not saying that I've stopped forever. Um, I need to see if in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse, like Sean and I have talked a little bit about this. I need to see if there's resolution already before I can go back and watch it.
Which
Because
you will have to
I
wait
stopped.
until spring of 2022, Courtney.
You know what? And that if that's what it takes, so be it. Because unless I get to a certain point in the year where I'm ready to feel broken, um, I'm not able to go to that right now.
Okay. Next up, well, you just have to wait a week, and then not this Friday, but next Friday we get Captain Falcon, Captain America Falcon, and the Winter Soldier. I really wish they would call him Captain Falcon, but I know they can't because the big N will come in with that.
Yeah, that's I am really looking forward to that one. I think I have to go back and watch um the movies that are specific with those ones again. I'm sure there will be a list of before you watch Falcon and the Winter Soldier, watch these Marvel movies first. But I'm looking forward to that one. Um, and I really hope that it's not the same situation as WandaVision, where it also just takes me down. But
You want to cover the last one?
yes, a local Pittsfield, uh, Pittsfield-born Elizabeth Banks is going to be directing Cocaine Bear, which is going to be a thriller inspired by events that took place in Kentucky in 1985. Is this about that cocaine bear that, like, the bear that just found a whole bunch of cocaine and just went absolutely ape for like it was the peak apex predator for the entire time until it OD'd?
Uh, I mean, yes. I mean, it died.
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying. It overdosed and died, but like I was wondering, I was like, is that what this is exactly going to be about? And yeah, I don't know. There's the Little Berkshires tie-in, so I'm interesting that it's going to be a thriller because I feel like something like the story of the cocaine bear would be a really fun comedy. I don't know. I'm twisted like that.
Um, I don't think they said it was a comedic thriller though.
No, no, I haven't seen anything either, and I'm like,
Just that it's a
I'm that type
thriller,
of person.
but I don't know. I don't know how that ends up. Like, I don't know.
Who
This was
knows?
requested that we include it because Elizabeth Banks, but I don't know.
Yes.
This isn't anything that I would be interested in seeing.
I am happy to see that it's getting a female director, but mhm,
Cocaine Bear.
yeah,
It sounds like the kind of film that that Penny was
it
always
sounds
trying
like
to
Blow gone wrong.
land a job on Big Bang Theory. Um, so
Oh, it
yeah,
totally does. Oh,
yep,
it
yep,
absolutely does.
yeah, all that kind of stuff. So, and that's it, folks. Again, we had it's a bit of a
We
sparse
dug
news
deep
week.
to try and
So, all right. So we're gonna switch gears then. We're gonna do our deep dive. Where we're gonna do our Jemmora AMA. So we do
yeah.
have a couple of questions from patrons and from folks associated with us. Um, so I'm gonna dig into those first before we get into Courtney's laundry list of questions.
It's literally
As a
2 pages
Jemmora
of
cast
questions,
member,
folks.
and notably the only cast member to submit questions for Jemmora. I'm calling the rest of you out live, but I don't watch, so you know that's okay. All right. So, we have a couple questions here. Who's a hero who gets more credit than they deserve? Um, so this is something I I haven't really gotten into very nitty gritty stuff like that. Because I mean, this is essentially creating a campaign setting from the macroscopic view. Um, I mean, for a tongue in cheek answer, I mean, we could say Jacob and Stainthorpe, uh,
um,
or anybody else in the adventuring party of the cast. Um,
I I I kind of want to throw into that, like, because we've made a lot of jokes with pop culture references,
mhm.
um, both during the home game and during stream. And the thing that kind of sticks out in my mind is the Lucarian Chronicles.
No, I'm scrubbing that because of individuals involved with that.
fair.
Yeah, so
But
I'm scrubbing
but
that
yeah, like we haven't
from our
but
sort of canon, as it were.
yeah, I would think that I would definitely think that Jacobin's exploits would definitely count. Um,
But that
I
said,
would
I mean,
fight
this
against.
is pertaining to the revised campaign setting, though. Um,
Mm,
and again, I have basically like people who lead nations established. Um, but you know, again, this is a macroscopic view. Um, so I mean, yeah, like I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I don't have one yet. Is the answer to that question? Next up is who's a forgotten or unsung hero? Um, and again, I mean, I don't really have that sort of granularity established yet.
could the um relics and all of that from that time area, like I would imagine because a lot of that technology is still around, but there's not much known about them. Um,
Yeah, well, so here's the other tricky part with that stuff. So the relic stuff is still going to be a thing, and I'll talk about that in a
yeah,
little bit.
that's why I'm bringing it up.
Um,
Yeah.
is so part of the issue with talking about that stuff is it is meant to be a mystery, right? And if you want that to be featured in your campaign, like the idea is that would be a very late game discovery. And so you don't necessarily want to put it up front and boom, like here's all the information right in the player's guide. Um so and part of it is, and this is what like Eberron did very well, is like intentionally leaving stuff out to leave it up to DMs and players. Um because the idea is like, so this is a world I'm making up, but I mean the intent is to, self-publish and put it out there if other people are interested in it. So
Hmm.
it's also, I don't want to give away all the secrets. And what necessarily may be secrets for, one campaign may not even be the secrets. The same things might not be true for the next campaign, right?
Hmm.
Um, so I mean, there's probably forgotten or unsung heroes, but that may change you know, from game to game, depending on that. I
Of
mean,
course.
there's likely heroes from the relic era that data has been scrubbed or is inaccessible for. Um, but almost nobody has any information on that. So there's not really any legends about it. Because that's the other thing to think about is, I mean, if
Yeah.
they're forgotten, I mean, why would it come up then? Like, if nobody has that information, how did it then get out? So, I mean, that's ultimately why villains don't just like slaughter everybody. They leave some people alive, is to then talk about it afterward. Uh, so that people know what happened, right? But does
I'm
that make sense?
reminded of the movie Inglorious Bastards of that's why they kill everybody except for like one,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they
That
let
was
them go
ultimately
and they say
what
spread
happened
the
there.
story.
All right, so we have comfort foods. Okay, so this is something that I have. Let's see. Oh, hang on. Let me just share this out real quick, and then I'll pop this over to Patreon so that I
Yeah,
can
because I know that I have asked about food in Jemmora already.
yeah, so food is very important. I would dare say food is probably one of the most important um things you can come up with for your campaign setting. Um as far as like a culture goes, because food informs a lot about culture, like food, fashion, um arts and music, sports and leisure. Like you look at all of those, and that tells you a lot about what a culture is like on the surface level. And then
Mhm.
you dig a little deeper down into like what are people's beliefs, like belief systems in place, and I don't necessarily mean like religions, but just culturally, what does that society value? Um,
Yeah.
all right, so we've got a couple revised cultures that are posted on the Patreon. Um, in Lilinosti, so Lilinosti is a kingdom, um, and it is a kingdom um, largely populated by elves and other sylvan creatures. But since this is a modern society, there are sort of dominant groups, dominant demographic groups. Um, but uh, one of the ideas is to not have this be a very heavy campaign setting. So there's a lot more free travel between places and immigration between places and settling between places, um,
Mhm.
so that just to keep things lighter, right? Um, but so one of the things about um, Velocity is it is a kingdom in three provinces that resulted from a great elven migration about 3,000 years ago, where they had a big war in Jemmora's version of the Feywild, because the Feywild is a term that you can't use in third-party D&D products, because
It's
it's
in the
part of
fairy
Wizards'
realm.
product identity. Um, so it's the realm of fairies, and when they arrived, they had to. It was an emergency uh, sort of refugee exodus, and in doing so, punched a hole in between the realm of fairies and the realm material, or the prime material plane. Um, so a lot of that bled out into the material world. So you have a lot of things where it doesn't make sense, right? One of the provinces, it's always nighttime in one of the provinces. Uh, and in another one, animals are intelligent and talk, right? Or the inhabitants are able to talk to animals, and a variety of animals become intelligent and talk just on a whim. And another one where magic is just suffused into everything, um, and it's all very storybook kind of magic. So, because one is like Riverlands, one is forest, and one is like these hills that are under a midnight sky perpetually. Um, Not a lot of grain is grown there. So, thinking about that, and how a lot of it's like forest, thinking about alternatives to say wheat and oats. Um, so they have a lot of nut flowers. They do grow sugar in sort of the riverlands. Uh, Fruit trees, berries, a lot of like wild foraging. Um, Forest foods like venison and quail. Um, so street food, you got stir fried rice, pastries, stuffed mushrooms, um, and like fancier meals that you might get like at an upscale restaurant. Put like very sweet glazes on everything. Um, so meats wrapped in pastry dough. So like everything like would be so it'd be like venison Wellington, right? Um,
Ooh,
like
that sounds good.
a sort of block of ground venison, or a venison steak wrapped in puff pastry. Um, and Because they're elves, or largely elves, um, elven culture, um, and sort of elven sensibilities blend over into the culture of the nation, such that um, folks that aren't elves kind of adapt to it, right? So. lots
Improvise,
of
adapt,
like
overcome.
lot of taking time to develop flavors. Um, just because uh, things are less pressing in that kingdom than they are elsewhere. So a lot of like slow cooking type stuff to develop really complex, really layered flavors. Um, so that's a little nasty. I spent a lot of time talking about that, so we're gonna try and uh, just go through other ones really quick. So Asperia is like a collection of individual city states. Um, they have flatbreads, wraps. So Courtney, you would ask about burritos before
Yeah.
because it's you. So that might be a place because burritos are kind of similar to wraps. Um,
Yeah, it just
with
depends on what you put in
vegetables,
them.
fish, chicken, not a lot of red meat in those. Um, finer meals, which are typically reserved for like family days, holidays, and stuff. Uh, lots of courses. It's like you spend like all day eating, and that's kind of modeled after like a traditional Italian um, dinner, which can have up to
Mhm.
like 7 courses. Uh, but those are like very special events. Um, Twillin, Twillin.
Mhm.
Folks that have watched the show before are very familiar with Twillin. The overall theme has not changed for the sort of gloomy kingdom. The food, a lot of soup, right? If it's misty, if it's rainy, if it's damp all the time, hearty, hot, hearty foods, soup and stew. A lot of like fish chowder is a big like seafood chowder is a big thing. Um,
We get a
fancier
lot of
meals.
potatoes.
Uh, yes, I mean a lot of potatoes. Um, Oatmeal is big for a breakfast item because it's like a hot soup basically for breakfast. Um, their beef is very expensive there because they don't have a lot of space for cattle. Um, so you don't see a lot of beef. You see a lot of sheep used in things. A lot of crock pot recipes, right? Every house has a crock pot. Uh,
At least one.
yep. In the Fispani Isles, a lot of seafood. These are sort of island turtles that roam around the oceans. A lot of seafood, um, sushi, fruit medleys, fish tacos, sweet potato. Um, so things similar to like sushi rolls, poke. Um, Basically, a lot of stuff involving seafood because that's the primary thing. When you have a very limited space, you try not to bring additional things on that are going to use up resources. Um, I mean, pork is generally the sort of meat of choice, just because there's a lot of different things that you can do with pork, um, or pigs rather, and like every part gets used. Um, that is also a place where you might find like pig ears, pig snouts, pig's feet. Um, any trope that you can think of like using other elements of a pig, like hog jowls and stuff. They might fry them up and use them as like pork
Mhm.
rinds. Pork rinds are probably
Yeah,
pretty big there. Um,
pork rinds are awesome.
Dreminot, pretzels, pretzel buns, pretzels, cured meats, hard cheese. These are folks that spend a lot of time out on cattle ranches, a lot of time out ranging or working in mines or in forests, like
They need
logging
stuff
and
that's
stuff.
gonna last.
So a lot of portable meals that don't spoil very quickly. Um, in contrast to the other regions, a lot of beef here. Beef is very plentiful. Um, a lot of beef, a lot of sausage. Beef sausage, chicken sausage, uh, fried potatoes, beer batters, um, very dark breads. Near the coast, fatty fish. So tuna, salmon, very stuff that has a lot of a heft to it. Um, so yeah. In addition, so that's just the places that have been um sort of redone. Um, other places, so other places that are like typically settled. Um, so Kazdal's mainly underground. So you're gonna see a lot of mushrooms, a lot of fungus, um, a lot of excuse me, sort of root vegetables that um they would have this unusual method of planting things where you like stick them up into the ceiling. Like you'd have sort of like how you see those houses in Scandinavia that have the planters built into the roof. Like you would have
Mhm.
that, but it would be like your roof instead of like something that you would like go on top of and tend. Like you would tend it from the bottom up. So root vegetable, onions, garlic, potatoes, um, and then like you would just like reach up and pull it down. Um, so things like that. Goats, because goats, they'll eat anything, they'll thrive anywhere. You put like a layer of moss out underground, and I'm sure they'll find some way to subsist on that. So goat, very big. Uh, as well as probably some more unusual underground critters. Maybe bat, like fried bat might be crispy bat wings. Uh, might be a delicacy there. I'm trying to think of what other places. Oh, so winter bite. Winter bite's tough. Um, this is so winter bite is kind of like it's polar. Uh, like we're not talking um subarctic. We're talking like full on Arctic. So food is limited there. Like so you're gonna see a lot of like seal, whale,
Mhm.
bear, probably. You might see like tundra grasses and stuff during the summers when everything melts for like a month. In the southern reaches. Uh, or it's just stuff that's magically created. You may have like a couple restaurants in town where like stuff is magically shipped in. Um, but like
You
that's
have
it. Like a
somebody
town might
that's
have a
casting,
single restaurant, and that's what the town can
what's
support.
yeah, it's like you have somebody that keeps casting, Magnificent Mansion, because that can feed 100 people.
Um, no.
No.
So Magnificent Mansion is a seventh level spell, so that means you have to be
Yes.
like a 13th level caster, I
Yeah.
think. Yeah. Um. So
I'm thinking
one
like
of
some retired adventurer.
well, so here's the thing, right? And I've kind of talked about this before, but I don't think you were on the podcast. So one of the
Mhm.
things is to bring up in campaign settings, right? Is scope, right? So if there's something that comes up that is like this is a threat to a region, uh, and this is a problem that Forgotten Realms has, is why are a bunch of like third level adventurers taking care of something like saving a whole kingdom when there are probably hundreds of thousands of like 15th to 20th level adventurers running around, because that's what happens in Forgotten Realms is like Dritz just shows up. You've got Dritz, you've got Elminster, uh Mordenkainen, technically from Greyhawk, but just roams everywhere. You've got Tasha, you've got all
Mhm.
these people, planeswalkers roaming everywhere, jumping from campaign setting to campaign setting. uh and it's also kind of the problem that Marvel has too, and that Marvel's done really well is, and they've kind of navigated it pretty well with the MCU, right? Um, is sort of like you can see this with the Spider-Man films is, you know, So spoilers for people that haven't seen Spider-Man Homecoming. Vulture's out there stealing alien tech from the job sites in New York after the I don't know what they called that, the New York crisis, the Tesseract
Yeah.
crisis or whatever. It's basically the events of Avengers 1. Uh Vulture's crew basically is going in and stealing alien tech to make their stuff. Um and like this has been happening. It's happened for like a decade and just nobody's
Yeah.
done anything about it. Like, why aren't they? Why hasn't the Avengers picked
Why
up on it?
haven't the
Like,
Avengers
they have
already
all that
come in
tech
and
to find out like what's going on everywhere, and this is a point that like has been brought up with Shield a number of times in like Agents of Shield. Uh, they bring it up like in Ultron, especially since like Ultron, the whole point was for him to just like monitor everything everywhere. Uh, that has been going on since that time, and it's basically a 15-year-old kid who happened to develop spider powers is like just
Mhm.
happens to come across it. Um, so it's thinking about in especially if you're going to start at level 1, if your heroes are doing stuff, where are all the higher level people?
Mhm.
Um, and so one of the things that like naturally happens with D&D campaigns, but I don't think people really think about when designing a setting is in Jemmora, there are no high level adventurers out in day-to-day life. This is because after a certain point, you go from being a regional hero to an international hero, right? You save the world or whatever, and then there's still threats out there, extra planar threats. So what happens is high level adventurers they go off world. They're out in there's like at least a dozen other realms that Jemmora is connected to. Um, so to put in terms of like the MCU for Asgard, right?
Mhm.
Is eventually like if Thor is the hero of Asgard, at some point he's got to go off Asgard to protect that realm, and he's got to go bounce around all the other one, like Niflheim and Muspelheim and
Mhm.
everything else. Um, but because the threats there are so ever present, you just never come back after a certain point. Like it's just there's always work to be done. Um, and like you might eventually come back at some point and actually retire. Uh, but at which point like it's your Hawkeye at that point, and it has to be something truly dire enough to pull you out of retirement. Um, and if that's the case, again, it's likely an off-world threat, and you're going elsewhere. People like they're not going to call you to apprehend a local drug ring down the street or whatever, um, because at that point you've likely lost too much.
Mhm.
Um,
Okay. Cool.
so so that's just also it's it's more likely that there would be lower level magic that's simply used to transport you know bulk food items up there.
Yeah.
um
You get food deliveries every so
yeah,
often.
or it's just you just have a regular person come up and deliver food like once a month or something,
Yeah.
which is what they do in the real world typically. um so um so things like that. So there's going to be um all right, so I see Joe writing in the chat. In this lighter fantasy world, there are no happy endings for those who fight. That's not necessarily the case. Um, it's just you get to a certain point where you are tired. Uh, at the end of an adventuring career, you are just tired. Um, and borrow another example from the MCU. Uh, you are Captain America in that you kind of had to give up stuff. In order to like you had to give up likely had to give up stability and just
Mhm.
having like a quote unquote normal life if you're going to go out and be a superhero, which is essentially what D&D characters are. They're fantasy superheroes. Um and at a certain point you might just be like, I just want to, I just want to be able to go home and garden. Basically just garden, watch the game, have dinner with my family, go out dancing once a week, and that's my life. Uh, and once you save the world so many times, I feel like I kind of deserve that. Like the universe owes me that. Um, and you're entitled to it. Because here's the thing: there's gonna be other heroes that are gonna be able to go out and take care of that.
There's
Because
a
there's
new
always gonna be
generation
up
that
and
will
coming
come in.
adventurers. It's gonna be a cycle. Um, and of course, and there's all sorts of other realms. I mean, the fairy realm being the big one that Jemmora is connected to, because there's like an entire nation that's lives kind of half and half. Um, so, uh, all right. So that's food, right? What is the calendar like? So basically, is it lunar, solar, whatever? Um, Basically, solar calendar. There are 7 days a week. Um, let's see, I have this in my notes somewhere, but basically, the days of the week. I'm gonna pull this up instead of having Patreon open. Pull my notes up here.
Yeah, it's in my
So,
like OG notes too.
well, these are new notes.
Ah,
So there are 7 days a week, 4 weeks in a month. So every month is 28 days. There are no extra days left over or anything. 12 months out of the year, and because stuff works like very orderly with like seasons and stuff on Jamora, it's 3 months corresponds to a season. Um, it's very Harvest Moon slash Stardew Valley esque. Uh, days of the week, you have Sela Day, Rom Day, Toff's Day, Norn's Day, Coors Day, High Day, and Fespa Day, named after the seven gods.
cool, cool.
So after Basella, Ramka, Toflir, Norn, Kure, Heim, and Fespan. Um, and that's just, I mean, that's taking it after the Gregorian calendar, where, except for Sunday and Monday, all the days of the week are named after Norse gods, with the exception of Saturday, which
Mhm.
is named after Saturn. Um,
Fun.
so yeah, Tuesday for Tyr, uh, Wednesday for Woden or Odin, right? So fun fact: the reason why we have such a weird name for Wednesday is because it stood for Woden's Day, and then it got truncated and everything. And that's
Mhm.
there's a lot of stuff, a lot of linguistic research going into things like that for Jamora on how things get their name. Um, Thor's Day, and Friday was, I think it was either for Frey, Freya, or Frigga, um, because they all start with F-R-I-F-R-E, whatever.
Mhm.
Um, and then Saturn for Saturn. So basically, they were all named after gods, and that's how we got our names for those days. So it makes sense to apply the same logic here, especially when there is a pantheon that is the dominant religion in many regions. So, so yeah, so solar calendar, very structured, very orderly. Um, Seasons follow it, right? So, as far as months of the year, I haven't come up with those. I haven't quite decided if I'm going to come up with like actual names, or just like if you have it be like Elder Scrolls and just be like, oh, the first of planting, and then the first of high spring, and then the first of high summer, and blah blah blah. But basically, or just have it be Um, that maybe even the months don't have names, right? And it's really just uh like Stardew and Harvest Moon or whatever, where it's like first day, or like spring 1-1, and then like the second month of spring, the first day of the second month of spring would be spring 2-1, uh, and that stuff. This also means that Jamoran calendars don't have like rollover days or whatever days that you have to like split in half with the hash mark and stuff,
Mhm.
because it's always 4 weeks. So, let's see. Awesome Driz, what constellations are there? What myths are behind them? This is an interesting question. Because in Jemmora proper, there is a set of stars and constellations. This is different once you get into Lilinosti. And even more different when you get into the Midnight Hills in Lilinosti. Because stuff there is different. So, um, I mean, as far as constellations, again, that's getting into a little bit of granular stuff. Um, and I know Driz is particularly interested in this stuff because he likes cosmic horror. So he's always thinking about like what sort of alien races are coming out from there, or elder beings. Um, uh, I mean, at least in the Midnight Hills is the Starry Elves, which are the elves associated with the courts from that region that they inhabited. Um, have an intrinsic connection to the stars. Um, I have not decided what the stars are. Um, because the sun and the moon are palaces that float through the sky. So I haven't quite decided what stars are, um, precisely. And that's
Cool.
inspired by sort of the solar barge concept from Egyptian mythology, where uh, or you could argue Greek mythology is the sun and moon are chariots drawn by are drawn by chariots of those dudes.
Yeah,
Gods and
those
goddesses that
gods.
serve Apollo and Athena, or and Artemis.
Yeah,
Uh,
that sounds
but in
right.
Egyptian mythology, it's like an actual barge that a lot of the gods live on. And what it does is during the day it sails overhead, and during the night it goes to the underworld, and they fight all like the demons and gods of the underworld, and have to basically fight their way. They have to Overwatch carry the payload all the way through the underworld to come back up to make sure that day comes again. This
So
is not quite
it's
that
Hades.
concept. It's just it's the Celestial Palace and the Lunar Palace.
Mm,
Um,
cool, cool.
so yeah. But as far as what the stars are, haven't decided yet. I haven't decided how space works. Because that's something that every D&D campaign setting does differently. Nobody seems to have a great solution that works with other campaign settings. Um, because sometimes it's called wild space, sometimes it's like if you're doing spelljammer, sometimes it's outside your crystal sphere and it's phlogiston. uh Sometimes it's the astral sea, like you just keep going and you reach the astral sea. I haven't quite decided. Might be the astral sea kind of concept, still undecided. um but I mean, there'll be constellations based on legendary figures and stuff. um I mean, a lot of these answers may come about when we finally decide how we're going to switch from the current campaign to the revised iteration of it.
Yeah.
Uh, because stuff that happens in the current campaign may end up being legends and constellations and things like that. I don't know.
Oh gosh, that's exactly what Jacobin needs, a constellation named after him.
Like, it may end up being that gods that don't appear in the revised setting are now constellations. So,
Hmm,
like that may be an idea.
cool.
Okay. So Joe, who's in the chat, asks, "Are there tieflings in Jemmora? If so, where are they mainly from in the world?" So tieflings are an interesting thing in Jemmora.
Yeah,
Um,
I didn't have the answer to that one, and he's
so
asked that, like, months ago.
tieflings are known as the Brunari in the Infernal tongue, which means exile. Um, it is taking a little bit of inspiration from the Draenei just in the name, but according to their history and their sort of oral history, um, that they are descended from devils who came to Jemmora to aid the civilization of Relic in fighting demonic invasions, and then were stranded when all of the portals to the hells, because in Jemmora there is no distinction between there isn't going to be a separate, abyss or hell or whatever. It's all going to be one, the pit, basically, and both demons and devils are from there. So this is a faction of devils that um said we can't have demons overflowing and running amok and everything. Because demons are just bent on the destruction of everything, and that's bad for business. We're going to help out the mortals, or at least the civilization. So, in doing so, got stranded when all the portals closed. Um, Relic basically gave them a parcel of land, a big parcel of land to settle on, and said, "Thank you. We'll help you build a nation." So they did, right? And then they settled in this region. They called it Bronner. Um, then what happened over the 10,000 years or so since that event is basically they were hit with demonic invasion after demonic invasion and were targeted by fiends from the pit. And eventually they said it is not safe for us to congregate in one area because, essentially uh other fiends can detect where we are, and we are not safe congregating in large numbers. So they all scattered, and they all scattered across Jamora. Um, so Bronner still exists. It is kind of a corrupted, sort of festering uh, land of like swamps and forests that are brimming with fiendish energy and fiendish magic. Um, just to avoid trying to avoid certain words that would make Courtney smirk. Uh, um, and so they're found all over, and there is no inherent suspicion or anything that like you might find in the Forgotten Realms of like, oh, it's a tiefling, they're descended from devils and blah 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 or whatever. Um, when in fact, as far as the lore and the history go, is it's a little unclear as to if it was just like a mercenary group, if it was like an order of Hell Knights or something that showed up. Um, but they came to save, they came to help save Jemmora. And so even if they were devils with typically evil intentions, uh, they helped show up to do the right thing. Um, and so basically, this is their descendants, um, who tend to not congregate together very much, um, out of at least a superstition that doing so might attract demonic attention.
Cool.
Why did I choose to go 80s esque in the rework? Thor Ragnarok is hella cool. Um, as a real answer, there is a certain amount. So I'm not going to discount the amount of nostalgia for doing a setting like this. In part, from like Stranger Things and things like that. But it's mainly, Thor. It's sort of the aesthetic in Thor Ragnarok really had a big impact, and it's my favorite Marvel movie. But the idea of having a high fantasy slash sci like a science fantasy game in which you have sort of retro tech and lasers alongside magic, um, and What I've found in my research and trying to, trying to figure out like what exactly makes something, an 80s thing. Uh, and looking at like what is the 80s defined by, like culturally. Um, and what's interesting is like outside of the fashion stuff and like the music and everything, the 80s is actually really defined by some awful, horrible things. Uh, so typically things like that. So it's also like, what if it was the 80s but done right? Like, what if humanity didn't screw everything up and got better, and as a sort of like hope punk 80s? So, you know, there is no rampant racism, there is no rampant homophobia, no, and thus there are no AIDS crisis. Uh Universal health care. There's no Reaganomics. Uh essentially keeping um what is it, planned economies and sort of local infrastructure. So it's also there's not really outsourcing of labor because you know uh there's not really nations getting exploited. Um because I mean the places where you would look at for sort of colonial nations to exploit, um there's either nobody living there, uh because like it's pretty forbidding, and there's just better places to reside. But it's also uh, it's not as overpopulated, right? There are still plenty of rural areas in Jemmora where there are monsters. So uh, it's one of those things where you can't push too far out into the wilderness, or the wilderness bites back. Um, and at a certain point, you just have to decide: is it really worth it? Uh, Especially when there are gods that are active. Um, like there is a god of the wilderness. Uh, it is hard to deny his existence because three of his progeny are giant islands swimming around in the ocean, and there are people living on them. So,
Mhm.
uh, so it's things like what if the 80s were done right? And I think that's an interesting thought experiment of like, what if we just didn't deregulate all of the industries, basically? Or just
Yeah.
deregulate kind of everything and reduce tax rates. What if we had universal healthcare? That was a big thing that I wanted to do. Just because like it's fantasy. Let's let's make it fantastic, right? Uh, and it's also introducing this idea of, especially since it's come up with a lot of um, making things accessible, for people that want it, for people that um, I don't want to say that need it to be accessible, but to introduce accessibility to people. And that makes it, and having those systems in place in a campaign world makes it so much easier to just say, yeah, I mean, sure, you know, your
Yeah.
character needs an assistive device. Yeah, I mean, you can get a basic one for free. Like you just go down to the clinic, you can get one. Boom, there you go. Now,
Yeah.
if you want one, now
If
you'll
you
have to
want a
pay for
special
one.
one.
If you'll have to pay for one if you want one that's like adventuring capabilities. Like if you want a combat wheelchair with spider legs, you'll have to pay for that. But you can get a wheelchair. You can get, if you have a character that wishes to have hearing aids, you can get them. Um, or any
Prosthetics.
sort of assistive technology, right? Um,
Mhm.
and that's just for accessibility purposes, make it a little more welcoming, um, for both characters and players. Um,
Yeah.
it's also thinking about that. Also, then introduces an interesting thought experiment of, so how does that interact with divine magic? And the answer is I can't remember where I heard this. If I heard it from if there was an article, if it was a podcast, if it was a TikTok video, or what. So
You just
divine
take in so
magic in
many
general.
different forms of media.
So arcane magic, pretty common, you know, especially in certain nations like Lunma lore. Like everybody knows a ritual. Like the culture in Lunma lore is everybody knows magic. Like everybody can at least cast some kind of ritual, even if it's just to detect magic. Um, because it's just infused into daily life. Uh, arcane magic, very common. Um, like most of your pharmacies and stuff will carry potions. Um, artificers, like alchemist artificers, will come up with brewing stuff up and everything. Um, as well as making like more mundane medications. For example, if it's something where you're just going to treat the symptoms, if it's because it then introduces a an interesting theory of um like for curing diseases, right? Like if you just take a
Hmm.
potion that cures a disease, does that mean that you didn't build up a resistance to it because you just wiped it out like in one go with magic? Um, so thinking about it that way, like they're still probably developing vaccines and medications and stuff to handle things without having to resort to just like completely wiping something out, so that people are building up immunities, tolerances. They're figuring out how to um,
Modern
or just
medicine
in
as
areas of
aided
anti magic
by,
or no magic. What's that, Courtney?
I said, modern medicine being aided by, like if somebody,
Yeah.
uh, the thing that I'm thinking of, right now we have COVID and people, it's like some people can't get the vaccines. They
Yeah.
still, like, even with everything that the developers have done to try and remove some of the most common allergen reasons why people can't have the vaccine,
Hmm.
like, there are still some people who can't have it.
Yeah.
And, like, that's when I imagine that magic would be kicking in, um,
Yes. Yeah.
is when
So
basically when medical fails, then there's magic.
yeah. But
But,
and
and you have free
sometimes,
healthcare, so it
and here's the
works.
thing. So a potion of healing will still cost like 50 gold, which is the equivalent of about, let's see.
Yeah, because the gold system is totally broken for trying to remove it to real world.
I mean, it's like $1,500, right? Thinking about it in terms of like US dollars in the 80s. Um,
Mhm.
so I mean, and that's, think about it that way. It's essentially like a first aid kit in a bottle. Uh, so yeah, I mean that's going to be expensive, right? Um, whereas I mean, if you're just achy, yeah, I mean, there's going to be the equivalent of like Tylenol. That's going to be like a couple bucks. Uh,
Yeah.
and even in traditional Dungeons and Dragons, like herbalist medicine just doesn't go away. Now,
Yeah.
but to get back to
I
the
mean,
point about
let's
divine,
let's let's put that out in Jemmora. Like May
yeah,
still does and knows apothecary stuff because
hmm,
that still works in her background,
yes,
this um even with this reboot and everything, because May's mom was basically a pharmacist.
yeah,
And like there's still magic, but like May also has done some basic healing on the party and can still do some of that basic first aid. And so it's, again, it's used in conjunction, and magic has definitely legitimately saved her life sometimes, but it's not discounting her skills as basically, yeah, basically having the apothecary and everything. So
yeah. Plus, it's also D&D magic, typically specific set of applications. Uh, D&D doesn't really like to go into like symptoms of things, and so like I mean, they have specific instances for like if you catch filth fever or sewer plague or whatever they call it, which is basically like probably like tetanus or sepsis, right? But like I mean, colds still exist. The flu probably still exists and everything. So there, treatments for that. Um, and I bring this up because most of the time it's divine spellcasting that has the magic that just goes like, boom, you're good. Um, divine spellcasting. Now, this is interesting. And this is again, I can't remember where I came across this, but it was super eye opening. I had never thought about it this way before, and I've been playing D&D for like 20 years. Um, so that says something. Um, so there is a plethora of arcane spellcasters in Jemmora because, like for wizards, it is a matter of um, applying yourself, right? Like in theory, anybody could become a wizard if they just studied really hard. Okay. Now some topics might be too much for them to figure out, but you know, they could probably
they,
figure some spells out and everything, right?
they could
But
get
we're
a
talking,
couple levels.
like eventually if you kept at it and if you kept studying, any one of us could probably learn like advanced mathematics. Some of it might take us decades to figure out, entry level stuff for that. Some of us might pick it up quicker. But my guess is that if you were inclined and you were really passionate about it, you could do it. Anybody could do it if the drive is there. So that's wizardry, right? Sorcery, you kind of have to get lucky and have the innate magic or whatever. That said, there's a lot of there's a lot of opportunities for those bloodlines to pop up in Jemmora. Um,
Well, and I think of that as like savant syndrome. Like you just get it at a young age and develop it, and if you choose to develop it further, you get to go on and do other things, or you kind of go and say, "Yeah, I'm done with that now."
um, maybe I don't quite know if
With
it's as similar to that.
ish.
Um, but anyway,
But yeah.
artificer, same thing with wizard. Like you learn how to do artifice. So in theory, if you're interested in gadgets and gadgetry and magical items and stuff, like you can learn it too. Warlocks, super easy. You just got to make a deal with somebody that's willing to give you power, and there are so many people willing to give you power in exchange for stuff. Uh, so again, arcane spell, like the barrier to entry is really low for most arcane spellcasters. Divine spellcasters, you have to be chosen. Because let's think about this. Uh, uh, Paladins, clerics, druids, to a certain extent, rangers, right?
Hmm.
Rangers are a bit of an odd case because of the sort of flavor and how they pick up their spells. We'll get to them. Uh, but basically, the big three for divine spellcasters, right? Um, is clerics and paladins. Uh, you are chosen by a deity. Um, and druids is essentially you have forged a bond with the nature spirits and the wild gods that allow you to practice these uh, supernatural magics. Um, Rangers are a little odd. I still don't think Wizards has figured out what they want Rangers to have with their magic. The idea is like it's sort of magical tricks that you've picked up along the way. Um, oh, and I forgot bards in the main arcane spellcaster classes. I don't know how I could have forgotten that. Again, bards, their whole subclass is colleges, right? Which you can interpret as the historical bardic colleges, where it's like traditions and everything, or you could put it in a modern context and say like, yeah, you go to bard college, like you
It's
go
like
to
trade
music
school.
school, or there are different performing schools, and you go to that school and you learn how to do stuff and everything. Again, I mean, it's all the bards are basically rock stars, that have learned how to practice magic. Um, so, uh,
Rock stars,
so there's
amazing
that.
authors.
But again, that is learned, and like you learn that stuff, and then are able to cast it through your performing. Um, whereas with divine spellcasters, um, you can be a priest and you can be devout and you can, follow the tenets of your faith and be passionate and be faithful and be loving uh every day of your life, and you may never get selected. Like you may never manifest as a cleric. Uh that like faith has some element in it because, you can technically be somebody who does not follow any religion and become a cleric. But uh having plenty of faith isn't necessarily a guarantee either. It is subject to divine whim, and that is inherently unreliable, right? So, essentially a nation can say, well, uh, we might have to do some sort of outreach program to generate more interest in, the evocative arts or the transmutative arts because, we're looking at enrollment in these programs coming up and it's pretty low, so we're going to run low on transmuters and artificers and stuff, and like, and evokers, maybe a decade from now, like we do, kind of like what we do with teachers. We say like, teaching enrollment's down, we're probably going to have a problem in like 10 years. um you can't do that with, divine spellcasters. You just can't. There may be a plethora of them one day, and there may be none, 5 years from now. Like they may all die out. They may all get blasted in, in a, some kind of divine war or something. Um, and so it's great when one shows up, but likely when one shows up, um, they tend to become leaders of religious congregations. Uh, because they wield that, that divine power, um, and, tend to use it to help their community. Um, Now, there are in some cases where like the priests of Basella, um, those that do manifest divine spellcasting capability, tend to go into the medical field to help stuff out. Just because that is kind of the background that their clergy have. So like their
It's
temples are
kind of like
basically like
certain
hospitals.
it's kind of like certain different things of nuns that are like they go into midwifery or
Yeah.
they are bakers or whatever it may be, like they these different sects of these different religious organizations go into different.
Kind of like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but again, it's yeah. I mean, an order, of monks, of nuns, of priests,
Order,
uh,
that's the word I was looking for, thank
of
you.
abbots, of bishops. Um, they might go their whole lives without ever seeing someone manifest divine magic. Um, and so it's because of that unreliability that these social structures and economies have built up without the expectation of there being divine magic to rely on. Now, it also means that when someone does manifest it, holy moly, there may be all sorts of pressure on that person. Uh, just like there would be, like if somebody started performing miracles in real life, uh, like if somebody was able to consistently, like go through and, like completely mend somebody's broken bones with a touch, or, to somebody, um, that was sighted and then lost their eyesight, say like an injury or whatever, and like restore that, like heal injuries, heal wounds, and things. Uh,
Yeah.
you can for sure say that there was going to be that there would be investigations into what this person is doing. If it turns out it's legitimate, they would be recruited hardcore into some sort of official government type thing. Bards must be so popular as one of the only arcane healers. Bards and artificers, as artificers also have that capability. Um, bards are a little bards are a little trickier because they inherently have their wild free spirits. Artificers, especially alchemists, typically tend to go into like the medical field and become, like pharmacists and things like that. Bards, man, one bard may be all about healing people, and another bard may just want to bring down the house. Uh, Wandering Rockstar cures the sick. Yeah, I mean that could be a thing. It could be. This is also not every musician ends up becoming a bard.
Yeah.
There are some people that are just really good musicians that have no magical capability. Uh, and that like instead of having their time split between like learning spells and learning instruments, they just focus entirely on instruments. Um, so yeah, so there's that. All right, now I know we're running a bit long. I think that's okay unless Courtney, you're getting hungry.
As I say, I have dinner coming at 9.
Okay. All right. So why don't we get to what are your most pressing questions? Now I will. So I see you have the Tempest and Lilianasi. So the
Yes, I'm gonna
Tempest,
focus on Lilianasti.
I was gonna say, so the Tempest is intentionally going to be not a lot of information. Sort of like how Zendrick and Arganessen were intended to be in the Eberron books. Um,
Mhm,
it's intended to be, here's a little bit of info. The rest is for you to fill in. Like here are general concepts. There's
mhm.
not a lot of people that go there because it's surrounded by a perpetual hurricane
Yes.
that you can only reach by air or sea, which makes it inherently dangerous to try and get to. Much
Yeah.
more so than driving through a hurricane.
So I'm just kind of looking through the questions that I've had.
Yeah.
So one of my bigger questions was, and it kind of all goes around spider silk. So like, is that special in any way, or is it like silk here, where it's just like a fine cloth or a fine um, material used in nicer clothes? Are the spiders tamed or domesticated like silkworms, or are there like people who are specially trained to be able to go in and harvest wild deposits?
Okay. So, um,
Because these are the types of things that I need
yeah,
to
yeah, yeah,
know. I
yeah.
need.
So, the giant spiders are tame. They are tame. So, the secrets to taming them are largely kept by uh, starry elf silk spinners who kind of
Yeah,
control the industry. Like that is that because that's one of the industry. So a lot of the industries that come out of Lilianosti are tightly controlled by the queen there.
I have questions about that after.
Sure. So giant spiders largely tame. Um, the silk that they spin, right, um, is similar to when, like, in theory, there have been attempts to farm spider silk for clothing, Kevlar, and things like that. It's an issue of scale, right? You have to get a
Mhm,
lot of spiders to harvest a lot of silk, um,
mhm.
especially if you want to do it ethically. This is the other thing. So like silkworm farming,
Yeah,
there's two versions. One is considered unethical. The other one is considered ethical. Takes a lot more time and effort to do the ethical version because it's you have to wait for the silkworms to spin their cocoons and then emerge from their cocoons, and then you have to pick up the discarded cocoons. As opposed to the moment they spin their cocoons, the unethical version is you then boil them, kill off the silkworm, and then you harvest the whole cocoon that doesn't have any rips or tears in it. Right? You get a much more, because with the ripped version, you then have to like mend some of the tears and everything or whatever. So it doesn't produce as fine of a product. But it's definitely come up, especially with animal rights folks, even though they're little worms. Um, it's
they're
a
still
thing.
aminals.
It'd be nice to not have to, boil them alive, basically, to then just harvest their cocoon. Um,
Okay,
so anyway, so yeah, it's just like spider silk. It's just you get a
okay.
lot more of it. Um,
Yeah, you just have
when
to have
you have,
specially trained people, but it doesn't have to be like, yeah. Okay.
yeah,
Um, and my next question was about the being able to trade live wood or silk outside the kingdom, because I did see that it says that the queen heavily regulates that. So do traders have to get like special permission to be able to trade that out of the kingdom, or can it not be commercially traded at all outside
There
of the
are only
kingdom?
a handful of companies that are allowed to trade those goods, and they are ones that typically have very strong business ties with the queen herself. Uh, Perhaps like they provide a lot of political support, um,
Hmm.
or make contributions to the crown treasury, things like that. So yeah, and it's widely uh, theorized that the companies that are allowed to do so uh, are through political favor.
Yeah. And so is there an exception for like private sales between like for individuals personal use? Like
No,
but
there is
then
no exception for that. That is,
okay,
if
I was
someone
I
who
wasn't sure
has
if it's
live
like, yeah, you
wood,
bought it from the trader and then like you keep it, you can't like you can pass it on to your buddy, I'm thinking gun sales. Like is
yeah,
it
no.
like that?
So here's the thing: because those are products that like basically came from the fairy realm, um,
Hmm.
the queen uh wants to keep a tight control on that because she wants to control those markets and
Oh yeah,
control
and
the
I don't
demand
blame
and
her.
control the supply and demand for it. Uh, if you are not a member of that company and operating with a license to make that sale, and you get caught basically by any sort of Lilinosti regulatory force, uh, typically the penalty is death.
Okay.
It is just flat out death, because the queen rules with an iron fist.
So things could get passed down from generation to generation, but you can't be selling it to somebody else.
Correct.
Okay.
It's also, uh, there are heavy penalties if you are found to be in possession of live wood stuff that was not acquired from a regulated business.
Hmm. Okay. Cool. Um, that I'm gonna leave this as my last kind of little bundle of questions, and I need to kind of get them all out at once. So, dormant portals to the fairy realm.
Yes.
Does someone watch over them to make sure that they stay dormant? Is it like a Stardust situation where it's very informal? Is it much more formal? Are there protections for if a portal becomes active? When, like, is it in recent history that the last time a portal was active? What happened? Like, do we know what happened last time it was active? And are there stories about like what do we know about the fairy realm?
So typically,
My inner
environmental
May just
groups,
came out.
yeah, typically environmental groups, keep a watch on that. Um, there may be other secret organizations that keep a watch on that. Um, Within Lilinosti borders, um,
Mhm.
there are groups that certainly keep an eye on that, but for the opposite reasons, uh, to try and reopen them. These are portals where it is difficult to reopen them, and they have not yet discovered a way. Um,
Okay.
this is something where this is one of the things where it's like a plot hook for the DM. Um,
Yeah.
that like your campaign may or may not feature it. Uh, but yeah, one of the possible goals for say villainous organizations in Lilinosti is to try and reopen fairy portals, uh, which might further destabilize the region. It might allow all sorts of fairy problems to manifest in Jemmora. The fairy realm is a place where it's all political intrigue and storybook magic and storybook terrors.
Mhm.
Uh, yeah.
Cool. All right. Yeah, I realized that a lot of like the info that you have decided to um, is it does leave a lot up to, like, other DMs if they want, but, yeah, I was like, "How formal of a situation do we have going on here?"
Yeah. Yeah, so for now, there have been no portals opened in recent history.
Okay.
Um, but there are like environmental groups that are trying to keep it that way, and to just try and stabilize the region as it is.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that's it. I mean, there's also envoys from Loon Malor, academic envoys from Loon Malor who want to try and study them. Um, that is a place that I'm still working on the rewrite for. Loon Malor, very heavily like urbanized, technologically advanced. Um, so like there are rural areas there, but like even the rural areas are likely hooked up to the ley line power grid. Um, like in most rural areas, like everybody's hooked up to a generator in order to get power. What is the highest level of adventures you still see running around the world? Probably level 10. Like once you get into level 11, that's when you kind of start running into like international like threats to the world. You may start going off world. Basically once you start getting like planar magic, um that's when people start going off world. Um and I think whenever plane shift is like that's kind of the big one. But even like ethereal step, um or ethereal jaunt or whatever, or etherealness or whatever, um yeah, like once you get to that point, that's kind of when adventurers stop being interested in the political goings on of the world. um it
Fair.
also means uh that there aren't a lot of obstacles to folks that are pretty high level that decided to stick around and stay active. Uh, these people tend to be the rulers of nations.
Cool,
Like
cool.
widely believed that the Queen of Lilinosti is actually an archfey. Um, the Emperor of Loon Malor uh, is likely possibly the most powerful arcane spellcaster in the world. Um, I mean
The
the
queen
Lord.
from Twillen,
What's that?
the queen from Twill, or
Queen's
the
it's
Twill
Queen's
queen.
missing. She's still gone. Doesn't matter
Yeah,
what time
that's
period. She's just gone. Nobody knows.
yeah.
Nobody's seen her in
We
years.
don't know where she is.
But the Lord Admiral, I mean, he's basically in charge of the entire Navy, right? So he is somebody that has had an entire military career ahead of him. I mean, if you really think about it, like folks like in Dreminot, Asperia, places where like it's a little decentralized, I mean, their political leaders are probably not very powerful adventurers.
Cool.
So, all right. Any last questions before we move on to a quick quest log?
I think that's going to be it from me tonight for
Okay.
this AMA.
Okay. Um, so just to talk about the Tales of Jemmora like podcast and show, um, there are still no plans for when the show will return. We are going to continue. Um, so we are going to get back to playing offline and kind of figuring things out. Um, so and we won't. We're not going to be changing the campaign setting at all for the show until we kind of figure out like when we're going to get back to streaming, and then we'll make a decision as to like once we have that figured out, we'll make a decision as to whether we switch things up, just have it be like a season 2 or something. That's still all up in the air. We don't know when we're going to be returning to producing the podcast and the show and everything. Um, so that's still an unknown. Um, a current thought is, uh, I mean, there may be an in-universe thing that happens that causes the campaign setting to change. and current characters
Ooh.
may move forward if players wish. Uh, but another option is if we just continue playing the current campaign as is, wrap things up at some point, and then just start fresh with the new campaign setting, as like a campaign two. So
I would be okay with either of these.
yeah, so I will say most of the cast, was either ambivalent or voted in favor of swapping over and figuring something out. It's just if we do that, we may see different characters and things like that. And really, I want to see where we go with like playing offline first before, because and we still haven't figured out. Um,
We still haven't met in person to play, you know.
yeah, and we don't know when we'll have studio access back to do our usual setup. Like we could, in theory, go back now, but like we'd be all in different rooms and everything, and it's like, well, we might as well be playing online, which we've said we don't want to do. Um,
And isn't really capable for us to do as well.
True, we do have some members that are just not capable
Yeah.
technologically. We also have some that aren't um, mentally, socially capable. I don't want to sound like I'm throwing shade at people, like you. But it's just the fact that there's a different dynamic and it doesn't work for those
Courtney
people.
doesn't do well when she can't just banter with somebody right next to her.
Yeah.
Let's call me out right now.
Yeah. That's why like every term that I thought of like sounded like I'm throwing shade that like that you weren't smart enough or whatever. It's like that's not what I'm
No,
trying to say.
I need the physical interaction with somebody to be able to do the banter.
Yeah.
It's
And that's
I'm the
that's a
person, like, I would be the Liam with the stick to poke Sam,
yeah.
like, or however
But
that
that's
went the other way, but yeah, that's what I need.
it's a so just a pro tip for people that have never played online before and have only played in person. There's a different dynamic because you can whisper in person, and it's just like lowering your voice and whispering to someone next to you. Uh, you have to use different avenues to do that when playing online
Mhm.
um, because essentially when you speak, you're addressing the group, and there's no way to get around that. Like you would have to basically text, or you and the other person would have to leave that chat, go into another chat to do your thing, and then come back. In which case, you
Just
totally missed
doesn't
everything that's going
work.
on. So
Yeah.
that's just a little dynamic to think about there. And it's a thing where if you decide that's you're okay with that for your game from the get go, more power to you. It's
Mhm.
it's and Courtney's not the only person. We do have other folks who have said that they
No, but I will call
that vibe
myself
doesn't
out
really
on
work
that.
with them. So all right.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to bring that up. So we'll just run through quest log really quickly because not a lot's changed, and we're gonna be off next week, so there's not really gonna be a lot else changing. But here we go. All right. So to make this really quick, quest log is where we talk about what geeky goals that we have for the next week and what geeky goals we accomplished this past week. Courtney,
I did nothing.
there we go.
For the sole purpose, and this is not because I just have been lazy. It has been the exact opposite. I started my internship, which is
Too much
basically
stuff going
another
on.
part-time job. So I'm trying to work in the new schedule.
Yeah,
So I would like to, get back into my Stardew game. I put a little bit of time in on my Switch game, but not really much. Um, I've been looking at some things. The Pixel Dice that we talked about a while ago. Actually, the Kickstarter launched for that. Um, so I've been looking at that. Um, and Joe and I backed the Pixel Dice, and I've been looking at some Tentacle Kitties. They have a campaign 2 coming out. Um, and that Kickstarter is live right now as well. Um, and I'm going to be backing that for a whole bunch of little ones. Um, I'm very excited about that actually. So thank you, Joe, for reminding me. I did do those geeky things. Um,
Nice.
but yes, and the pixel dice are so pretty. I can't wait.
All right. So for me, really quick, I did get a comic done. I did recolor another chapter one comic. We're up to 44, I think now. So rapidly approaching number 50, which is our halfway
Nice.
mark for chapter one.
Woo.
And the second half of chapter one, there's a lot of single page comics in there, which makes it so much easier. Let me tell you. Uh, but I'm not going to. So the other one, so technically it's not an item icon for glory and pie cake. However, it is the holy symbol for Basella, so I'm counting it because it's basically the same thing, but it's going in the Tales of Jemmora book instead of the video game project. So
It's going in
Basella
a different
is
book.
Basella is the goddess of life and death. So a lot of the gods in Jemmora now have like dual domains that are opposite, right? Four of them have opposing domains, and then three of them have uh, um, complementary domains. Um, so Basella, Kure, Toflir, and Norn have opposing domains, whereas Ramka, Heim, and Fespon have complementary ones. So Basella, goddess of life and death, her holy symbol is the lily, um, which represent, of course, the lily is a flower, represents life, new life, growth, spring, renewal, and everything. But also of death, tranquility, of peace after death and the afterlife. Um, and so that's just a representation of that. Black lily specifically with sort of bright green tips on it to symbolize the life aspect.
Ooh.
Um,
Yeah. Charge board. Go.
so yeah,
Ways I want you to.
so I did that. There's still no turtle spirit happening. I ran out of fuel for that, and I haven't felt like playing. Like I've been farming anima from doing like world quest or not world quest, but missions with my followers in Warcraft, but I haven't actually been playing. Just I've got a lot of stuff going on, and so it's either been Valheim and just chilling and like base building in Valheim, or it's just been binging Dimension 20. So that's been a thing. Like I have one episode. It was it's a 17 episode season of 2-hour episodes. I started a couple days ago and I'm on the last episode. Like I just started the last episode. So yeah.
That's not bad. I thought that was longer.
There are many more seasons. This is the first
Okay.
season for Fantasy High.
Okay.
Yeah. Um so yeah. That's what I'm up to. Not going to be doing anything next week. It's not even going to happen. Not even going to try. Just because I'll be on vacation. So I'm not setting any goals for myself
Fair.
aside from just stay alive,
Eh,
survive.
that is a good goal to have.
Yeah. All right.
And kind of same for me. I'm trying to get into adding 15 hours to an already full-time job
Yeah.
is
No, that's
a
too
lot
much.
of work.
Yeah. It's totally fine. Also, we I'm just letting you know, Courtney. You don't have to set 3 goals for quest log. I just did it because it felt
Oh,
like a
no,
good
it's just
number.
those are things that I've just kind of, I still want
Yeah.
to get my ostrich. I still want to,
Yeah.
get just all of the dinosaurs and I still want to cook everything. It's and I'm still working slowly towards getting ingredients and stuff like that. Like these are the things that I want to do. And once I get dinosaurs, I just need to start making more of them now,
Yeah.
really. Just waiting
I
for
mean,
more eggs to drop.
it's also totally okay to put a goal on the back burner for a while and to like bring,
Okay.
and if you wanted to replace it with something, bring in something that's like more immediate.
Yeah.
That's also okay too. That said, we've already run a little long. Thank you all for joining us. I know Courtney's got some other questions. We can either save them for an AMA or Courtney and I can just chat about them. Don't know. Uh, Let us know. You can send me an email at Sean at 8-bitadventures.com. You can also find us on social media. Just look for 8-Bit Adventures, Facebook. Twitter is probably not great as I don't go on it these days anymore. Facebook is probably the best bet. Um, but you can also, if you're interested, check out our the other work from 8-Bit Adventures at 8-bitadventures.com. Over there, you can find comics, podcasts, videos, streams, artwork, and more. If you'd like to help support that content, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/8bitadventures. Over
And
there,
if you
$2
support
and up
Patreon,
patrons.
yeah, if you
Sorry.
support us on Patreon, you too can get access to the reworks that Sean has been working on.
Yep.
At what level is that again, Sean?
$2 and up page, so adventurer tier patrons um,
Mhm.
can get access to all of Lost Courtney right at the very end. All of the um, sort of playtest like draft material that's been posted so far. This includes Jemmora subclasses, culture spotlights. Eventually, there will be magic items and equipment that goes up there. Artwork for Tales of Jemmora. So things like that. There are patron exclusive comics, early access to the 8-Bit Adventures comic, um, all that great stuff.
Yeah.
Lastly, our opening theme is One Up by Professor Shy Guy. You can find his stuff over at professorshyguy.bandcamp.com. And one of these days, I am going to set up a command in chat so that we can just give a shout out that puts his link in there. So, with that, we're done. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time. And as always, have fun, happy gaming, and enjoy your pie cake.
Bye, everybody.